Whoopi Goldberg thought she could destroy Tulsi Gabbard's political future by calling her a Russian asset and traitor to America on live television. What happened next triggered the biggest veterans backlash in media history and ended The View's 27-year run. The ABC studios in Manhattan's Lincoln Square felt unusually tense that Thursday morning in February as producers prepared for what they'd internally called the Gabbard takedown episode. The View's signature Hot Topics table was set for confrontation, with Whoopi Goldberg reviewing her notes for what she'd privately described as the interview that would expose Tulsi Gabbard once and for all. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard sat in the green room, wearing her Army National Guard pin, alongside a sharp burgundy blazer, reviewing her own preparation materials. She'd agreed to appear on The View expecting a discussion about foreign policy and her recent criticisms of the military-industrial complex, unaware that Goldberg had spent weeks coordinating with Democratic operatives to orchestrate what amounted to a televised character assassination. Goldberg had been planning this attack since Gabbard's departure from the Democratic Party, seeing her as a traitor who needed to be publicly destroyed. Her research team had compiled what they called a comprehensive destruction file, out-of-context quotes, guilt by association claims, and unsubstantiated allegations that would paint Gabbard as a Russian sympathizer and enemy of American democracy. As the cameras rolled and The View's familiar theme music played, Goldberg launched into what she thought would be a systematic destruction of Gabbard's credibility and patriotism. Ladies and gentlemen, we're joined today by former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who's been making headlines lately for all the wrong reasons. Goldberg's voice carried the righteous indignation that had made her a progressive icon. Tulsi, let's get right to it. You've been accused by multiple intelligence officials of being a Russian asset. You've repeatedly parroted Kremlin talking points. And many people are questioning whether you're still loyal to America. The studio audience murmured with anticipation, expecting to see Gabbard squirm under Goldberg's attack. So my question is simple. Goldberg continued, leaning forward aggressively. Are you working for Russia? Are you a traitor to your own country? It was vintage Goldberg. Skip any pretense of journalistic objectivity and launch straight into character assassination, using inflammatory accusations designed to make any response look defensive and suspicious. But Gabbard had been expecting this exact approach. Her decades of military service had taught her to remain calm under fire, and she'd spent the past week preparing for every possible line of attack. Whoopi, I appreciate you having me on, though I have to say, your opening contains some serious accusations that I think we should address directly. Gabbard replied, her voice steady and professional, despite the hostile environment. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a folder marked with official military seals. Since you've questioned my loyalty to America, let me start by sharing some facts about my service to this country. Shiakitinon. Goldberg tried to interrupt, but Gabbard continued with the authority of someone who'd briefed generals and congressional committees. I've served in the Army National Guard for over 20 years. I've deployed twice to Iraq, once to Kuwait. I've held a top-secret security clearance for over a decade. I've served on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where I've received classified briefings on threats facing our nation. Wham! She opened the folder and held up an official document. This is my security clearance renewal from last year. It required an extensive background investigation by the FBI, including interviews with dozens of people who've known me throughout my life. Was there anyone? The studio was getting quieter, the audience beginning to sense that this wasn't going according to Goldberg's script. But more importantly, Gabbard continued, these accusations you're making, that I'm a Russian asset, are the same smear tactics that have been used against anyone who questions the military-industrial complex or advocates for diplomatic solutions to international conflicts. She looked directly at Goldberg. So before we continue, I have a question for you, Whoopi. What's your experience with national security? What qualifies you to question the loyalty of a combat veteran who spent 2 decades serving this country? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Goldberg's confident expression faltered as she realized she'd just been put on the spot by someone she'd assumed would be an easy target. Well, I've played characters who dealt with military issues. Goldberg stammered, clearly not expecting to have her own credentials questioned. I've done research for roles. You've played characters, Gabbard repeated, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. Whoopi, you're sitting here questioning the patriotism of someone who's actually served in combat zones. And your qualification is that you've played characters in movies. The audience was completely silent now, many looking uncomfortable as they realized their host had just made one of the most tone-deaf statements in television history. "That's not what I meant," Goldberg said defensively. "I mean, I've studied these issues." "Have you?" Gabbard pressed. "Because if you'd studied these issues, you'd know that the Russian asset accusation has been debunked by multiple fact-checkers. You'd know that it originated from a discredited political operative with ties to Hillary Clinton's campaign." She pulled out another document. "You'd also know that I've consistently voted for sanctions against Russia-supported aid to Ukraine and called for investigations into Russian election interference. But those facts don't fit the narrative you're trying to create." Goldberg was starting to look desperate, her usual quick wit completely absent. "But you've made statements that align with Russian propaganda." "Such as," Gabbard challenged. "Give me a specific example of something I've said that constitutes Russian propaganda." Goldberg shuffled through her notes clearly, struggling to find a concrete example. "Well, you've criticized NATO expansion." "I've questioned whether expanding NATO to include Ukraine was worth risking nuclear war," Gabbard corrected. "That's not Russian propaganda. That's a legitimate policy position held by many foreign policy experts, including former Defense Secretary Robert Gates." She leaned forward. "But here's what really bothers me about this interview, Whoopi. You've accused me of treason, one of the most serious charges you can make against an American citizen, based on nothing but political talking points and guilt by association." Her voice grew stronger. "I've spent my adult life serving this country in uniform. I've risked my life in combat zones. I've taken an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And you're sitting here, someone who's never served a day in uniform, questioning my loyalty because I don't support every war the establishment wants to fight." Sunrum. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the other co-hosts looked uncomfortable, realizing that Goldberg had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I've served alongside men and women who died for this country." Gabbard continued, her voice taking on an emotional edge. "I've attended their funerals, comforted their families, and carried their memories with me every day. And you think you can sit here and call me a traitor because I believe in diplomacy over endless war?" She stood up and began removing her microphone. "This isn't journalism, Whoopi. This isn't even entertainment. This is character assassination, pure and simple. And the fact that you think your acting experience qualifies you to question the patriotism of combat veterans shows exactly how disconnected you are from the reality of military service." Oh. Goldberg tried one last desperate attempt to salvage the interview. "Tulsi, I think you're being overly sensitive." "Overly sensitive?" Gabbard repeated, her voice rising for the first time. "You just accused me of treason on national television. And when I defend myself with facts and evidence, you tell me I'm being overly sensitive." She looked directly into the camera. "To the veterans watching at home, this is what we're up against. People who've never served, never sacrificed, never put their lives on the line for this country, questioning our loyalty because we don't support their political agenda." She gathered her things. Whoopi Goldberg thinks that playing soldiers in movies qualifies her to attack real soldiers who've actually served. That tells you everything you need to know about the disconnect between Hollywood and the military community. Shutshurna. With that, she walked off the set, leaving Goldberg sitting in stunned silence at the Hot Topics table. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, Whoopi Goldberg disgrace was trending on Twitter. Veterans organizations across the country issued statements condemning Goldberg's attack on a combat veteran. The moment when she'd claimed that playing characters qualified her to question military loyalty was being shared millions of times. But the real backlash came from the military community itself. Active duty service members, veterans, and military families flooded social media with their own stories of being disrespected by civilians who'd never served. Gold Star families shared their outrage at seeing a combat veteran's loyalty questioned by someone whose only military experience was acting in movies. The Veterans of Foreign Wars issued a statement calling Goldberg's comments deeply offensive and unpatriotic. The American Legion demanded her immediate firing. Iraq and Afghanistan. Veterans of America organized a boycott of The View's advertisers. The financial consequences were swift and severe. Within 48 hours, 6 major companies had pulled their advertising from The View, citing concerns about the show's attack on military veterans. Disney ABC's parent company faced protests outside their headquarters from veterans groups demanding accountability. But perhaps most damaging was the cultural shift. Goldberg's tone-deaf response to Gabbard's military service had exposed a broader disconnect between coastal elites and the military community. Her claim that acting experience qualified her to question veterans' loyalty became a symbol of Hollywood's arrogance and ignorance about military service. The breaking point came when several ABC affiliates in military-heavy markets announced they would no longer carry The View, citing viewer outrage and advertiser pressure. The show that had been a daytime television staple for 27 years was suddenly toxic to the very network that had created it. 2 weeks after the disastrous interview, ABC announced that The View would be ending its run at the end of the season. The official statement cited changing viewer preferences and a desire to refresh the daytime lineup. But everyone knew the real reason. Goldberg's attack on a combat veteran had destroyed the show's credibility beyond repair. Goldberg's personal career suffered even more. Her comedy tour was canceled after veterans groups organized protests at every venue. Her memoir deal was dropped by her publisher. Even her co-hosting gig on The View's final episodes became untenable, as advertisers demanded she be removed from the show entirely. Gabbard, meanwhile, saw her national profile reach new heights. The interview had showcased not just her military credentials, but her ability to defend herself and other veterans against unfair attacks. Military families across the country rallied behind her, seeing her as someone who would stand up for their community against elite condescension. In her first major interview after The View's cancellation, Gabbard was asked what she'd hoped to accomplish in that confrontation. "I wanted to show the American people what veterans face when they speak out against the military-industrial complex," she said. "The moment you question endless wars or advocate for diplomatic solutions, you're labeled a traitor by people who've never served." She continued, "Whoopi Goldberg's attack wasn't just on me. It was on every veteran who's ever been told their service doesn't matter because they don't support the right political positions." Her claim that acting in movies qualified her to question veterans' loyalty was the final straw for a military community that's tired of being disrespected by Hollywood elites. The interviewer asked if she felt vindicated by The View's cancellation. "This was never about destroying a television show," Gabbard replied. "It was about defending the honor and dignity of everyone who served this country. When someone attacks veterans' loyalty based on nothing but political disagreement, there have to be consequences." The lesson was clear. In an age of social media and veteran activism, attacking military service members can backfire spectacularly when it encounters someone who's actually served with honor. And when Hollywood privilege meets military sacrifice, authentic service wins every time. Whoopi Goldberg thought she could destroy Tulsi Gabbard's political future by calling her a Russian asset and questioning her loyalty to America, using her platform to launch a character assassination disguised as journalism. Instead, she exposed herself as someone so disconnected from military service that she thought acting in movies qualified her to attack combat veterans. Her career-ending encounter with Gabbard became a perfect example of what happens when civilian arrogance meets military honor. When someone who's never served tries to question the loyalty of someone who's risked their life for their country. And when the disconnect between Hollywood and the military community finally triggers consequences that can't be ignored or explained away.